Have you ever wondered how much a pet truly understands us? Can a dog's instinct really save lives? In a small town in South Carolina, Cooper, a 12-year-old Labrador retriever, proved that loyalty goes beyond love. When an elderly couple, John and Margaret Thompson, prepared for their grandson's wedding, they never imagined that their greatest protector would be the four-legged friend they had raised from a puppy. But when a cunning stranger disguised as a family friend enters their lives, Cooper's sharp instincts are the only thing standing between them and a devastating betrayal. Stay tuned as we uncover how Cooper's unwavering loyalty and the power of animal instincts saved his family from a nightmare they never saw coming. Will you trust your pet's gut feeling when it matters most? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. And for more heartwarming and thrilling stories like this, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest videos. The morning sun gently streamed through the lace curtains, casting a soft glow across the Thompson family's cozy living room. On a familiar rug by the window lay Cooper, their 12-year-old Labrador retriever, his warm eyes watching quietly. His golden fur, now streaked with gray, was a sign of the years he had spent by John and Margaret's side. To Cooper, John and Margaret weren't just his owners, they were his family. He'd been with them since he was a playful puppy, running through the garden and bringing joy to their lives. These days he moved slower, but his loyalty and love for them hadn't changed a bit. Cooper wasn't just a dog. He was their protector, their friend, and a comforting presence in their lives. John and Margaret, now in their late 70s, were well loved in their small town of Charleston, South Carolina. Their home, a charming old house with a wraparound porch and a garden full of flowers, had always been a welcoming place for neighbors and friends. Margaret was known for her delicious homemade pies, often baked for church events, while John, a retired school teacher, was always ready with a kind word or a helping hand. After decades of marriage, their love had only grown deeper. They had faced life's challenges together and built a life filled with warmth, kindness, and family. But nothing made them prouder than their grandson, Luke. And today, excitement filled the air. Their beloved Luke was getting married. The wedding would take place in the backyard, where he had once played as a little boy, and the Thompsons were filled with joy. The house buzzed with activity as family and friends gathered to help with the final preparations. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the sweet aroma of Margaret's apple pie, and laughter echoed through the house. Cooper watched everything from his favorite spot by the window, his tail wagging softly as familiar faces passed by. But today, there was something different, a feeling he couldn't shake. His instincts, honed by years of protecting the Thompsons, told him to stay alert. As the morning unfolded, the doorbell rang. Cooper's ears perked up, and a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled in his throat. It wasn't loud enough for anyone to notice, but it was enough to show his unease. John, with his gentle smile, opened the door to find a woman standing on the porch. She introduced herself as Helen, a distant relative of Luke's fiancée, Sarah. Helen was an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, and her warm demeanor immediately put everyone at ease. "Oh, I hope I'm not intruding," Helen said softly, her voice carrying a pleasant tone. "I just arrived in town and heard about the wedding. I thought I'd stop by to see if I could lend a hand." Margaret, ever the gracious host, welcomed her with open arms. "Of course, dear. Any family of Sarah's is family to us. Please, come in." Helen stepped inside, her eyes taking in the warmth and charm of the Thompson home. She complimented the flowers, the decorations, and even Cooper, who remained quietly by the window, watching her every move. But as she walked past him, Cooper's growl grew a little louder. His body stiffened, and his eyes followed her with unwavering attention. Margaret noticed his unusual behavior and gently patted his head. "Cooper, behave," she said with a soft smile. "Helen is our guest." Cooper's tail wagged slightly, but his eyes never left Helen. Something about her didn't sit right with him. His instincts, sharpened by years of protecting the people he loved most, told him to stay on guard. Helen, meanwhile, charmed everyone in the house. She shared stories, offered to help with the decorations, and quickly won over the family with her kindness. To everyone else, she was a lovely guest, a kind-hearted woman who had come to celebrate a joyous occasion. But Cooper saw something different. His gaze remained fixed on Helen, his body tense and ready. Deep down, he felt a warning, a silent message that only he could understand. As the day went on and the preparations continued, Cooper stayed by the window, his watchful eyes never straying far from Helen. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing for certain: something was not right. And in the quiet moments between the laughter and celebration, Cooper's silent vigilance remained. A reminder that sometimes the most loyal hearts can sense danger long before anyone else. The wedding day at the Thompson home was filled with excitement. The air was thick with laughter and joy as friends and family gathered for Luke's big day. The sweet smell of food wafted through the house, and the sound of cheerful chatter echoed in every room. John and Margaret stood side by side, beaming with pride, watching their beloved grandson Luke prepare to marry Sarah. It was a day they'd been waiting for. Everything was perfect. But amidst the festive mood, something wasn't quite right. Cooper, their 12-year-old Labrador, was acting strange. He had always been calm and friendly, greeting guests with his wagging tail and eager eyes. But today, something about him was off. His usual relaxed demeanor had been replaced with nervous energy, and his behavior was growing increasingly unusual. It all started when Helen, a seemingly sweet, elderly woman, arrived at the house. She introduced herself as a distant relative of Sarah's family and quickly charmed everyone with her warm, friendly manner. But when Helen came near John and Margaret, Cooper's response was immediate. He growled softly, a deep, low sound that no one could ignore. John, ever the patient one, gave a soft chuckle. "Cooper's just being protective," he said, brushing it off. "With all these people around, he's probably just a little on edge." Margaret, too, didn't think much of it at first. "It's all right, Cooper," she said, rubbing his ears to calm him. "Helen's here to help with the wedding. She's part of Sarah's family." But despite their reassurances, Cooper wasn't settling down. His growls grew more pronounced, and he refused to leave John and Margaret's side. It wasn't like him to act this way, and it was starting to raise a few eyebrows. But Margaret dismissed it, thinking it was just the excitement of the day, making Cooper uneasy. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the house was filled with joy. But Cooper's strange behavior only intensified. The once calm dog was now pacing near the front door, his eyes darting toward the windows, watching the shadows in the corners of the room. It was almost as if something unseen had captured his attention, and he couldn't tear himself away from it. He growled at nothing, his body stiff and alert. John, who had noticed Cooper's unease, walked over to the dog and knelt beside him. "What's wrong, boy?" he asked softly, rubbing Cooper's head. But Cooper didn't respond in his usual way. Instead, he continued to stare at the door, his growls low but persistent. John glanced over at the window. There was nothing out there, no sign of danger. The yard was quiet, the only sound coming from the distant chirp of crickets. Still, Cooper wasn't backing down. Something was wrong, and John could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Margaret had noticed it too. She came to stand beside him, looking at Cooper with concern. "John, what's going on? Why is he acting like this?" "I don't know," John replied, his voice tight. "But Cooper's never been wrong about these things. He's always had a sense for trouble. Remember that time he sensed the gas leak, or when he barked at that stranger lurking near the house?" Margaret's face grew serious. She knew what John was talking about. Over the years, Cooper had proven time and time again that he could sense danger long before anyone else. Whether it was warning them of a gas leak or alerting them to a stranger outside, Cooper's instincts were sharp. And now, for some reason, he was on high alert again. Cooper continued to pace, his eyes never leaving the door. He would occasionally bark at the shadows, his tail stiff and unmoving. Margaret tried to calm him, but he was beyond comforting. Something was happening, something that no one could explain. John stood up and moved toward the door. "I'm going to take a look outside," he said. "Maybe there's something in out there that's got him worked up." But when he opened the door and stepped into the yard, there was nothing. The street was empty, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of the night. There was no sign of movement, no hint of danger, nothing at all. Cooper, however, wasn't convinced. He barked loudly, refusing to stop, until John returned to him. His eyes were still locked on the shadows, and the fur on his back was bristling. There was something out there that only Cooper could sense. John closed the door, his mind racing. "There's nothing outside, Margaret." But Cooper's not letting up. "I don't like this." Margaret's worry deepened. "What do you think is going on?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," John admitted, "but I trust Cooper. He's always been reliable. When he acts like this, it's for a reason." The wedding guests were still mingling in the other rooms, unaware of the tension creeping through the house. The joy of the celebration seemed distant now, overshadowed by the unease that lingered in the air. The once warm and inviting home felt colder somehow. Cooper wasn't letting up, and neither were John and Margaret's growing concerns. Later that night, long after the guests had gone to bed, the house fell silent. The wedding celebration had come to an end, but the unease didn't. Margaret lay awake, listening to the occasional sound of Cooper's pacing, his soft growls echoing in the otherwise quiet house. "John," she whispered, "do you think there's something wrong with Helen?" John sighed, turning to face her. "I don't know, but something's not right, and Cooper knows it." For the first time that night, Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. What if Cooper's trying to warn us about something? About her? John couldn't answer. He just lay there, staring into the darkness as the sound of Cooper's restless pacing filled the silence. Outside, under the cover of night, Cooper stood guard, watching, waiting, and listening. And in his heart, he knew something none of them could see. Something was coming. As the wedding day drew closer, excitement filled the air. The house was alive with energy as the final touches for Luke and Sarah's big day were being put into place. But amidst all the preparations, Helen, always eager to help, stepped in with an offer to take care of some of the more delicate details. She insisted on looking after the family heirlooms and managing some of the finances for the day, assuring John and Margaret that it was no trouble at all. At first, it seemed like a kind gesture, and the Thompsons, ever trusting, allowed her to take charge. However, it wasn't long before Cooper, the loyal Labrador, began to show signs of distress. The more time Helen spent handling the family's precious belongings or getting close to John and Margaret, the more uneasy Cooper became. His calm and steady demeanor was slowly replaced by subtle signs of agitation. His growls became more frequent, especially when Helen was nearby. Even when she didn't approach directly, Cooper's eyes never left her, following her every move, his body tense, with a quiet but unmistakable warning. It was impossible to ignore. To anyone else, Helen might have appeared as the perfect guest, charming, helpful, and full of smiles. But Cooper's instincts never wavered. The dog, who had once saved John and Margaret from countless minor dangers, was certain that something wasn't right. He wasn't just being protective, he was trying to tell them something important. Luke and Sarah, on the other hand, had no such doubts. They trusted Helen completely, seeing her only as a distant relative who had come to celebrate their wedding. They were caught up in the excitement of the day, oblivious to the tension that Cooper had already picked up on. Despite the dog's increasingly obvious discomfort, John and Margaret remained unaware of the growing threat. Then one evening, as John made his way through the kitchen, he caught an unexpected exchange. From the shadow, he overheard Helen speaking quietly with a catering staff member. Their words weren't meant for anyone else to hear, but John's sharp ears caught enough to make his blood run cold. Helen's tone was soft, yet there was something undeniably sinister about it. "Make sure everything is in place," she said, her voice low but clear. "There can be no mistakes. We don't want anything going wrong." John froze, his heart pounding, as he tried to make sense of what he had just heard. The words didn't seem to match the kindly woman who had been so helpful, so perfect in front of everyone else. Was it a slip of the tongue, or was there something deeper behind her words? John tried to investigate further, to piece together the meaning of that conversation. But before he could get any closer, he was interrupted by Margaret's gentle voice. "John, darling, you're working yourself up again," she said, her tone filled with concern. "I'm sure Helen meant no harm. She's just helping out. You're just tired from all the wedding stress. Let it go." Margaret's voice was soothing, and John, always wanting to avoid adding more worry, reluctantly let the matter go. Yet, deep inside, something nagged at him. The conversation had unsettled him, but Margaret's calm reassurances pushed him to the back of his mind. He knew she trusted Helen, just as everyone else did. But Cooper never stopped watching. As the days went on, the old dog's pacing grew more frantic. His growls became more frequent, and his eyes, once warm and loving, were filled with an intensity that John couldn't ignore. It was as if Cooper knew something that everyone else didn't, something John wasn't yet ready to believe. But as the wedding day approached, one thing was becoming painfully clear. Cooper wasn't just protecting his family from a threat he could see. He was trying to warn them of something much more dangerous than they could imagine. The day they'd all been waiting for had finally arrived. The wedding day. The Thompson family home was a vision of beauty. The backyard was awash in colorful flowers, with the soft glow of fairy lights twinkling above. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, music, and the clink of glasses as family and friends gathered to celebrate Luke and Sarah's special day. The excitement was palpable, and for John and Margaret, it was a moment of pure joy and pride. Their beloved grandson was about to marry the woman of his dreams. Yet, despite the festive atmosphere, Cooper, the loyal family dog, seemed anything but joyful. The usually calm and steady Labrador paced restlessly, his eyes following every movement Helen made. He watched her from a distance, never taking his gaze off her, his body tense and his tail still. Every time Helen moved, Cooper's ears perked up, and his posture stiffened, as if he could sense something that everyone else missed. As guests mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging stories, Cooper stayed close to John and Margaret, never straying far from their side. It was clear that he was on high alert. The joyous atmosphere of the wedding seemed to be lost on him. Instead, his attention remained fixed on Helen. Helen, ever the gracious guest, appeared to be in her element. She moved among the guests with ease, smiling, chatting, and offering her help. She seemed to know everyone, and her charm was undeniable. She had a way of making people feel comfortable, welcomed. But Cooper wasn't fooled. As the afternoon wore on, Helen made her move. She approached John and Margaret, offering to help with one last thing before the reception began. "I was wondering," she said in her smooth, pleasant voice, "if I could take a quick look at that beautiful heirloom you've kept in the attic. It's been on my mind all day, and I'd love to see it, just for a moment." John, eager to keep the wedding day flowing smoothly, smiled and nodded. "Of course, Helen. It's right upstairs. Just be careful with it. It's quite old." Before Margaret could speak, John was already turning to guide Helen to the attic. But as they began to walk, Cooper's behavior shifted from uneasy to intense. A low, menacing growl echoed through the room. It came from Cooper. Margaret froze, her heart skipping a beat. She looked at the dog, then at Helen, who was now standing in the hallway with a look of surprise on her face. "Cooper," Margaret called softly, but the dog's eyes were locked on Helen. His growls deepened, and his stance grew more aggressive, like a protector who wouldn't let anyone come near the ones he cared about. "Cooper, stop that," Margaret said, her voice calm but tinged with concern. She tried to coax the dog away, but Cooper didn't move an inch. He stood his ground, blocking the path to the stairs. Helen, who had been so confident and charming just moments before, now took a small step back. She smiled politely, trying to brush off the dog's behavior. "Oh, he's just being protective," she said, her voice light. "It's nothing. He'll calm down in a moment." But Cooper wasn't backing down. His eyes never left Helen, his body still as a statue, his growls now louder and more persistent. He wasn't just being protective, he was issuing a warning. Margaret looked at John, her brows furrowed in confusion. This was unlike Cooper. The dog had always been gentle, always calm, even around strangers. But now, something had shifted, and Margaret couldn't ignore it. She reached out to calm the dog again. But before she could speak, Helen made her second attempt. "I'm sure it's nothing," Helen said, stepping forward again, trying to brush past Cooper. But as she took a step forward, the dog lunged, barking furiously. It wasn't an attack, but a clear message. Cooper wasn't going to let her anywhere near the stairs or the family. He wasn't going to allow her into the attic. "Cooper, that's enough," John said, his voice firmer now. But even as he spoke, he could feel the tension in the room. The guests, who had been chatting and laughing just moments before, stopped and turned to watch. The lively atmosphere of the wedding was quickly fading, replaced by a nervous tension. Helen, trying to maintain her composure, gave a forced laugh. "I'm sure he's just tired, poor thing," she said, stepping back with a tight smile. "I'll leave you to it then." But Cooper didn't move. He continued to stand between her and the stairs, his gaze never leaving her. The guests murmured among themselves, their eyes flicking between the dog and Helen. There was an unease in the air now, a ripple of discomfort that hadn't been there before. No one could explain it, but they all felt it. Something was off. Helen, who had managed to charm everyone else with her warmth, was now visibly annoyed, her smile faltering just slightly. "I suppose I'll try again later," she said, her tone colder than before she turned and walked away. Cooper remained where he was, still watching her every move, his muscles tense. He didn't move until Helen had completely disappeared from view. and only then did he relax slightly, though his watchful eyes never strayed far from the hall. John and Margaret exchanged looks, the unease from earlier settling into their hearts. What was it about Helen that Cooper didn't like? Why had the dog been so adamant in his defense of them? Margaret brushed it off, trying to focus on the joy of the day. But deep down, a small seed of doubt began to sprout. As the wedding continued, the guests returned to their conversations. The music resumed, and the laughter returned. But for John, Margaret, and Cooper, there was a lingering sense of discomfort. They had no idea what Helen's true intentions were. But one thing was clear. Cooper wasn't about to let her out of his sight. And as the night went on, the feeling that something wasn't right only seemed to grow. They were all too caught up in the celebration to realize just how close they were to danger. The wedding was over, but the unsettling feeling that had loomed over John and Margaret's home refused to fade. The night had been filled with joy, laughter, and celebration, but in the quiet that followed, something didn't feel quite right. It was as if the events of the day had hidden a truth that had yet to surface. Luke and Sarah, initially dismissing Cooper's aggressive behavior as overprotectiveness, started feeling the weight of the situation. At first, they had chalked it up to Cooper just being a dog, reacting to the new people and all the excitement. But as the hours passed, they began to realize that there was more to it. Cooper's instincts were picking up on something they hadn't noticed. Sarah, ever the observer, began piecing together small moments that, in hindsight, seemed strange. Helen had always shown a curious interest in their family's valuable heirlooms, those prized possessions Margaret had inherited from her grandmother. And then there were those frequent trips to the attic, which seemed a little too deliberate. Each time, Cooper had grown more agitated, growling and pacing. Yet, Helen always brushed it off, dismissing Cooper's behavior with a forced smile. Luke, too, couldn't shake the growing unease. Helen had slipped into their lives so effortlessly, weaving herself into their family fabric with charm and poise. But now, looking back, he wondered if it was all an act. The perfect guest, the perfect house guest? Maybe it was all a carefully crafted illusion. But it was John who, feeling the gnawing suspicion deep within, decided to take action. His mind kept returning to that overheard conversation. Those whispered words between Helen and a staff member, something that didn't quite make sense. The more he thought about it, the more he realized it was time to investigate. John crept quietly to the security system in the study. His heart pounded as he accessed the video footage from the day. His finger hovered over the controls, and then, as if to confirm his worst fears, he saw it. There was Helen, slipping into the study as if it were second nature, her movements precise and deliberate. She approached a locked drawer that contained critical financial documents and precious heirlooms, those things Margaret had always held dear. Helen paused in front of it, and John watched in disbelief as she began tampering with the lock. Her fingers worked quickly and expertly, a look of determination on her face. John's stomach dropped. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Without wasting a moment, he rushed to Margaret, shaking her awake. His voice was filled with urgency, but remained quiet, careful not to alarm anyone else in the house. "Margaret, wake up. It's Helen. She's trying to steal from us." Margaret's eyes shot open, confusion quickly turning to disbelief. "What? No, that can't be." "It's true. I saw it. I have proof," John said, trying to steady his voice. "She's been planning this all along. She's not here for the wedding. She's here to take what she can." Margaret, still stunned, looked at him, her mind racing to catch up with the shocking revelation. "But she's been so kind, so trustworthy. Are you sure?" John nodded firmly, showing her the footage. It was irrefutable. Margaret's disbelief turned to a cold realization. The woman they had welcomed into their home, with open arms, had been plotting something far darker than they could have imagined. As the truth began to settle in, John wasted no time in calling the authorities. It didn't take long for the police to arrive, and when they did, they were swift and efficient. The tension in the house was palpable as officers moved quickly to apprehend Helen, catching her in the act as she attempted to pry open the drawer. Helen, caught red-handed, was arrested on the spot. The family watched in a mixture of disbelief and relief as she was taken away in handcuffs. This woman, who had been so charming, so friendly, was no more than a con artist. She had been targeting wealthy, elderly couples for years, infiltrating their lives with fake kindness and stealing their most valuable possessions once they had gained their trust. The weight of it all hit them hard. How had they been so blind? How had they missed the signs, the warning signs that Cooper had picked up on so clearly? But as the police processed Helen and began their investigation, more details emerged. They uncovered a string of similar incidents, families just like theirs, all deceived in the same way. Helen had made a career out of posing as a trusted friend, only to betray that trust for personal gain. In the midst of the chaos, John, Margaret, Luke, and Sarah were left to absorb the shock. The woman they had trusted, the woman they had welcomed into their lives, had been nothing but a wolf in sheep's clothing. As the evening drew to a close and the police took Helen away, the family sat together, trying to make sense of it all. The wedding had started as a joyous occasion, a moment to celebrate love and unity. But in the end, it had turned into a sobering lesson about trust, deception, and the importance of listening to that quiet inner voice. And through it all, there was one clear lesson that stood out above the rest. Cooper, the dog they had loved and trusted, had saved them. His instincts, which had been dismissed as mere animal behavior, had been right all along. He had been the only one to sense the danger before it was too late. As they sat together, reflecting on everything that had unfolded, they found themselves filled with a deep sense of gratitude. Cooper had been more than just a pet. He had been their protector, their guardian, and in that moment, it felt as though he had single-handedly saved them from a far worse fate. In the end, it was Cooper who had uncovered the truth. It was Cooper who had kept them safe when they had almost allowed themselves to be fooled. And it was Cooper who had reminded them that sometimes the most trustworthy allies are the ones we least expect. The wedding, despite its earlier chaos, slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The family home was still beautifully decorated, the sounds of guests talking and laughing filling the air. But a deeper, more profound understanding lingered among the Thompsons now, one that had been shaped by an unlikely hero. Cooper, their loyal dog, had won the hearts of everyone that day. His courageous instincts had not only protected the family, but had also exposed a danger they hadn't seen coming. Now, as the celebrations resumed, Cooper stood proudly among them, receiving affection and admiration from every corner of the house. The once ordinary pet had transcended his role, becoming the true guardian of the family. Luke and Sarah, still processing everything that had transpired, approached Cooper with new respect. Luke, his body full of emotion, knelt down beside him. "You were right all along, Cooper," he said softly. "We should have trusted you from the very start." His words held a depth of understanding that only came after a crisis had been averted. John and Margaret, standing together nearby, exchanged a look. It was clear that they were reflecting on everything Cooper had done for them, everything he had kept them from. Margaret, her eyes filled with gratitude, whispered to Cooper, "You've always been our protector." "We will never ignore you again." The sincerity in her voice conveyed a promise that went beyond mere words, a vow to always cherish and appreciate the unwavering loyalty that Cooper had shown them. The family, moved by the day's events, shared a quiet but emotional moment, surrounded by love for their protector. Cooper was more than just a pet now. He had become a member of the family in the truest sense, a guardian, a hero. He had saved them when they needed him the most. The realization hit them hard. How often they had taken for granted the quiet loyalty of their furry companion, not fully understanding the depth of his protective instincts until that very moment. As they sat together, each of them silently reaffirmed their commitment to Cooper, not just as a pet, but as a member of the family whose intuition, courage, and love were invaluable. The bond between them had deepened beyond measure. In the quiet corners of their hearts, the Thompsons made a promise they would never break: to always listen to Cooper, to always heed his instincts, and to forever be grateful for his protective presence. In the months that followed, life for the Thompsons slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. But the impact of that unforgettable day remained in their hearts, guiding them. Inspired by Cooper's bravery, they decided to expand their family by adopting another dog. Daisy, a spirited young pup, soon joined their home. Cooper, though aging and slower than before, took it upon himself to show Daisy the ways of loyalty, protection, and love. It was as if he knew his mission wasn't over yet. With patience and care, Cooper taught the younger dog the same values that had made him such a steadfast guardian. Cooper had earned his place as the heart of the family. Though his steps were now slower, his role as protector, as guardian, remained as strong as ever. And in his silent way, he continued to guide not only Daisy, but the Thompsons themselves. As time passed, the family found themselves sharing their story with others, spreading the word about responsible pet ownership and the vital, often underappreciated role pets play in our lives. They spoke not just of the joys of having a dog, but of the deep, protective bond that can develop when you truly listen to your pet, when you trust their instincts, and when you treat them as family. The Thompsons became passionate advocates for pets, sharing their story with the local community and beyond. They wanted others to see what they had learned, that pets, especially those with a deep bond to their families, have an incredible ability to sense danger and protect their loved. What an incredible journey of loyalty, instinct, and love. Cooper, the silent guardian, showed us just how powerful the bond between humans and pets can be. His bravery reminded us that sometimes the ones who love us unconditionally are the ones who see the dangers we don't. We hope this story touched your heart and made you appreciate the incredible pets in your life even more. Remember, their instincts might just be the protection you need, even when you least expect it. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Cooper's amazing actions. And for more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our latest content. Until next time, always trust your instincts and never take your loyal companions for granted. See you in the next video.